Welcome back to Worldie Unboxed, the Founders Edition. In this episode, we're thrilled to introduce Amélie Morency, an entrepreneur with a passion for launching and scaling innovative ventures. Through her work in multiple industries, Amélie has demonstrated a talent for building businesses that challenge the status quo and deliver real impact. In the conversation, we'll explore Amélie's journey, from her earliest spark of inspiration to the practical lessons she's learned navigating the startup world. Stay connected with us at worldiebrand.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more behind the scenes insights. All right, let's talk to Amélie.
So, can you walk us through your background and just basically all the different entrepreneurial ventures or, startups that you've been a part of?
Yeah, so I think I really started when I was a kid, doing a bunch of, odds and end things. I was really into selling things when I was a kid, and I didn't really have like a rationale behind it as much as I just liked selling things. Garage selling was a really big one, and then I would go to door and just try and sell basically anything I could think of to my neighbors, to a point where I had to start going on other streets at some point because they just knew me. Um, I had my first real legit company when I was 14, when I started lawn mowing. And then I kind of gradually grew that business to a point where I was working retail store selling lawnmowers, and then I would sell people on the service to use their lawnmowers basically. And when I started cooking school, I started a catering business. And the next step for growing that business was to get a kitchen, which was really like the hardest thing about it because I was subleasing someone else's kitchen after hours. And yeah, I basically outgrew that kitchen really quickly. And all my friends at the time who also were looking for kitchens were basically kind of using mine. So I thought I would build a giant kitchen and then share it. And that's kind of how I got the idea for Food Room, which was really, I think, to this day, the biggest thing I've done. Um, I got into this tech incubator called the Founder Institute in early 2015. And I decided to go the route of, big tech VC money thing. So I made it a tech business to justify fundraising money, really. I raised about $1 million, and we were operating for about 13 months total. Um, the whole business, like the whole thing, was about 3.5 years. But yeah, for 13 months we operated, and then the business had to shut down in the fall of 2017 because cash flow was incredibly hard. We ran out of money, basically. That's what happened. And then I had a couple of experiences after that working as a kind of entrepreneur en résidence where I was working for an angel, and I was working on a bunch of businesses he invested in, which was super cool because I have all the fun part of being an entrepreneur without having the financial responsibility of the human beings. And then I had a couple of ventures here and there throughout those years where I flipped a bunch of things. And I did most of my sales, I guess, at Amazon. I was selling used books on FBA. I also did like some eBay and some Shopify experiments. And I got involved into a business where we were trying to rebuild a blueberry wine company. The owner had died and the son inherited the thing. And that was like a whole project that I was involved in for a bit. Um, and then, yeah, recently when I left on mat leave and I joined a video production agency. And I ran that for 2 years. And when we decided to shut down the business, I've been fractional CEO since then. So for the last 15 or so months. Um, yeah, that's like the short version, I guess. Um,
And do you feel like starting from a super young age and then basically doing entrepreneurship for, I don't know, how many years it's been at this point, but I'm guessing it's been a decent amount of time. So do you feel like starting out as early as you did has been helpful for you? Or do you think that really those first experiences didn't teach you anything more about entrepreneurship or prepare you more than anything else that you had been doing at that time?
Um, so I think I definitely learned a lot by doing. Like, I remember there's like a point, I mean, I still have some of my old business plans. And I remember when I was in the incubator, at that point, I had like structured and, ran two businesses. That was my third. But the process, like every time I was doing it again, was getting more serious and more refined, I guess. And I've noticed like a clear like mindset shift each time. Whereas, the first time you make a sale for 3 grand, you're like, oh, this is like super stressful. And then you get super excited for 3 grand. And then, a year later, I'm selling, you know, I'm walking around with like 50 G's in my pockets. And that feels like really not that impressive anymore. So I think there's like a kind of, and I'm sure you've experienced that to some level also, like just entrepreneurs are kind of desensitized, the value of money you get as a founder versus like just a normal person who has like a day job. Um, Money has like a different value. And like you're signing deals and you're like, yeah, my company's valued this and this and so and so. And there's kind of this kind of disconnect between what money actually is like. And I feel like that happened really early on for me, where I was, you know, I don't know, I think for sure having some kind of experience like on paper, going to school and learning about, cash flows and this and that is useful. And I've done it. Like I studied restaurant management, so I had classes where they were teaching us about finances and stuff. But it felt really surfacey. And when you're doing it without the purpose of like the context of for a specific business use case, it felt kind of just a bit useless. But then when you get into a real business context and you realize how not in depth the things you saw in school was. And for me, like when I had Food Room, like to this day, I'm still impressed that I managed to raise that money because it feels like my understanding of the numbers was really not strong enough. And I really felt after that I needed to get better at it. And I kind of was really fortunate enough to work with an amazing CFO who taught me, everything. Um, and now it's like my first reflex for anything is just Excel spreadsheet it. Um, but that came really later after. And that was really just by doing it because no matter how many times you were like, yeah, you need to do an Excel spreadsheet, I didn't want to do it. I was bored. I just didn't really see the point. And this specific case of Excel might be intimidating for a lot of people too. Um, but once you understand how useful it is, um, yeah, it's a different perspective, I think.
So what was that experience like fundraising? Because $1 million, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So what was that process like, raising that amount of money for the first time? Do you have any tips for people who maybe that's in their future?
Yeah, I don't do it. Um, no, it's incredibly hard. Like just to give you context, at the time I was 23, I was a solo founder, and I was a woman in a business in an industry that no one wants to touch with a 10-foot pole. So I had a lot of things going against me. Um, and so the process of fundraising was extremely grueling. Like sometimes I meet people and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna hire someone to fundraise for me," and I'm just like, "That's not how it works." Like at the early stage, people are gonna invest in you as a human being a lot more than they're gonna invest in your business. Once you reach Series B or C, you have traction and you have a proven model, then it's like a different game. But really early on, they're trying to assess if they like you, like they like your face and your drive. Um, and so I guess I had that going for me. Um, but it was basically playing this infinite game of finding the lead is really the thing that was the hardest. And getting people to agree on a valuation was really tricky because I was in a situation where I had to raise money in order to build the product. So I didn't have any kind of traction whatsoever. And for me, the only kind of traction I could get or, commitment was to sign like getting letters of intent, which are non-binding. So really, it doesn't mean much for an investor. So yeah, I think as far as tip goes, I mean that the landscape has changed tremendously since then. If I had to do it again, I would probably raise in the US a lot more than I did at the time. Um, I was in the process of fundraising a second round when I went bankrupt, and I was talking to US investors also. And the momentum and just like I feel like the general kind of risk adverse Canadian vibe. I mean, Quebec is even worse than Canada in general, I think. Um, but yeah, I would have literally the same pitch to two different investors the same week. And the US one was basically, where do I sign? And in Quebec, they were kind of just like, meh. Um, so that was like really interesting just in terms of like how culture is going to impact your ability to fundraise as well. So yeah, I think honestly, I would go the bootstrapping route as much as possible now if I had like, unless I really had to. But like just in terms of giving up equity and everything, like my specific case was complicated because I had to invest so much money into the physical product, which was a building that I didn't own. Like if I had to do it again, I would totally find a partner who owns real estate and partner with them instead of, having to me put up that money to fix the space. That was probably like one of the biggest thing that was, problematic with the business model from the get-go.
That makes sense. And you mentioned that you kind of played up the technology angle to make it
Yeah.
easier to raise. So can you talk a little bit more about what the business model was? Because it sounds like you own the building and there's also at least some kind of technology component to the business as well.
Yeah. So like I don't think the value added of the technology, like the value or what I pitched versus what it really was, I didn't really get there technology wise. Um, so the idea was we are going to build this giant kitchen, share it with a bunch of people, and then cut the cost down for everybody, make it accessible to start a food business by having really high grade infrastructures. Um, the the concept of ghost kitchens wasn't unheard of at the time. I think timing played a definite part in me not succeeding as well as I could have had, if I opened my business 3-4 years later. I think the rise of delivery apps would have completely changed the landscape for me. Um, as far as the technology side, we were making this bet on how do we get as close as possible to 100% usage of the space and maximizing, the layout of the floor plan, like the actual collaborative space to make it that people have access to all these things. They can use all the equipments. We want to basically get everything close to 100%. And what happened in reality is I discovered managing human beings is a lot harder than it sounds. Um, which is probably one of the biggest takeaways. But in theory, people are really willing to do collaborative and shared and this and that until they actually have to share. Which what happened for us a lot of the times was I kind of felt like I was running a daycare some days, honestly. Where it was like some equipments we only had one of, so because that specific thing is like 500, $50,000, we don't have money to afford 5 of them. And so we had to book the specific equipments in some cases. And then, it was just like, oh, well, I was supposed to use it at this time, but then someone came and just put their, octopus in it or something, and now it's all stinky. We need to wash it. And it's just like the downtime for the cleaners and all of these things to kind of fit in the scheduling of it was kind of tricky. And like between you and me, we could have probably used like some kind of booking software of some kind that exists on the internet that would have done pretty much the same job as what we were trying to build. But for the sake of, the incubator, we had to kind of have this own technology thing. But I think before the technology was able to help us do these things, we had to figure out the logistical aspect to it. And we tried a couple things, and like over the course of 13 months, we didn't really get there yet. We got to 100% capacity, which was really cool, but the money wasn't coming with it. So we weren't even there in terms of like product market fit either. It was hard to figure out, and I wish I had more time to do it. Like I honestly, till today, I couldn't tell you what the right way to go about it was or how it would fix those issues. We definitely need to try more things.
And that's a huge issue, product market fit, because a lot of founders really struggle with that. So
Yeah.
what advice would you give someone who's just starting out in terms of trying to find that product market fit as soon as possible?
Um, I was I would say to be obsessed with the customers, like in terms of trying to deliver value. And I'm saying that, and I'm trying to put myself back in my shoes of 2016 when I was running it. It feels like we were in this kind of, we were getting a lot of feedback and a lot of requests from people, but then it's also like not everything was not reasonable, but just like didn't make sense for us financially also, right? Like a lot of people were hoping to come and use our space, and then we would acquire a piece of equipment for them, but they would be the only one using it. So I can't pay 30 grand for a machine that, if you're going to pay me $1,000 a month to come use it, right? So we had to figure that out. But honestly, it's like, as far as like product market fit goes, is like not who's the loudest, but you need to figure out what's the kind of single customer use case you have that have all the same issue. And someone telling you I would pay for that doesn't mean they're going to. And so I think I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who are doing validation and asking not necessarily leading question, but just like, if you're not asking someone to buy the thing, then you haven't validated anything. Like the best validation is actually getting people to pay for something. And the whole theory of 1,000 fans can get you anywhere as far as like building your business or a community or whatever. I mean, it's the same for artists really, but I think that's really true. Like we had, I think at the end, like 52, 53 customers. And I have good relationships with a lot of them still. And it's been 7 years, like so the ones that are still in business. I mean, the ones, some aren't, but we still talk. I think having like a really cool and well communicated, set of values and like the mission, if you're really just genuinely trying to help people over like just, selling them something, that really resonates, and that helps a lot getting people to kind of follow into what you're trying to do. But
And,
product market fit is like super hard, honestly. It's like, I think the single hardest thing.
and who exactly was your target customer, and how did you figure out kind of who that was and who it wasn't?
Um, so restaurants were kind of lower in the list at the time, just because the concept of ghost kitchen wasn't, I mean, especially like in Montreal, like in Quebec, the rules, like the food establishment stuff is a bit more complicated. So we were kind of looking at um overflow, like or central production for people who have multiple restaurants. Or we had a lot of meal delivery services, like food prep kind of companies. And otherwise we had caterers, a couple food trucks. But the problem with food trucks is like legally here, you need to have a physical address, like a physical kitchen to prep. You're not allowed to cook in the truck. You're just allowed to serve food. So that was kind of something we were hoping to build on. But again, we have like 3 months of summers. So it's not like a whole year kind of like the stability of building the model for us would have had to rely more on food delivery, meal prep and stuff. And I think, the people knew we existed. So like we didn't really have an issue signing new customers. The biggest issue we had was we had a lot of turnover in customers, because company starting means that some of them are going to stop existing. And the fact that all my clients were like new. Some of them were just like, that's not for me, I don't like being in business, or I'm not an entrepreneur, or this is too hard, or whatever. So that was like something we really underestimated. But then it's like a lot of my customers were small brands making, jams or whatever else. So those kind of customers were really cool. But also the minute they get kind of bigger and they want to have a more centralized production, they need more equipment and bigger facilities, and we couldn't really offer them that.
And we talked before about how you were a solo founder,
Yeah.
and how that's different from having co-founders. So what was it like building this company as a solo founder? What were some of the challenges? And then maybe what were some of the benefits of that as well?
So the thing that I didn't know I needed until I had one was a co-founder. And that only happened later in my life, like not with this business. So like and I think that was literally the single biggest thing I could have done to make my life easier at the time. Because so when I had my catering business, I remember getting to a point where I was clearly overworked. I was going to school in the day and I was working nights and evenings. And I was sometimes stuck in the kitchen till 2, 3 in the morning cooking the actual food. And I remember thinking, this doesn't make sense. I need help. And I couldn't figure out which part to delegate. Like I was at the point where I already had realized that what I liked was the building the business part, and the logistical aspects of it. But I was getting kind of drained with the cooking. But I was scared that by hiring a chef, I wouldn't have control over the kind of division of the business and this and that. So when I got into food room, I had made a decision that I was going to stop my catering business to build that company. But I did not have anybody to share the mental load with. As far as like, I had employees that kind of grew and took on a lot of responsibilities, but it was never the same. And I didn't really know what it was because I never had it. Like I had a really positive experience with employees. Um, but I think, yeah, just the mental burden of having a business. And I mean, it's like a lot of up and down. And it's like sometimes, the same day everything is on fire, and then 15 minutes later, it's the best day ever. And navigating between the two, and especially at the time where I was fundraising, um, it's extremely hard. And then the other thing was like I was super young, and I got this kind of unwanted, like I don't want to say fame, but like I was on Dragon's Den, and I had like known enough in the community that I would show up at an event and have a lineup to talk to me. And when you're 23 and you don't really know how to deal with that kind of influx of people wanting stuff from you, um, it's really hard. And I remember people saying like, someone left a bad review like on Google saying I was full of myself. And I thought that was hilarious because I was so eaten alive by the imposter syndrome at the time that I wasn't even self-aware enough to realize, Um, and so looking back to that time of my life and having someone who would be, my equal, we're aligned on this business that we're building, and it doesn't have to be 2 people, it could be 3 or whatever. But just I feel like that's like honestly a game changer. If you can have this relationship, and like my partner and I in the video business, I'm married, but I would talk to him so much more than I like in the grand scheme of things, and we would fight and everything, but it's so much more intense than the relationship I have with my wife, just because it's nonstop, like you can't turn off the business in your head the way you could just with your 9 to 5. And so having that human fit, I think is tremendously important.
And we talked about this a little bit before. A lot of people talk about the upsides of entrepreneurships, the highs, but you don't hear a
Yeah.
lot about the lows.
Mhm.
So what was it like, having to shut down a business? What were some of the feelings you were having? How were you able to deal with all that?
Yeah, it's unexpectedly, I felt a lot of relief. Um, for many reasons. I think, first of all, there was a point where I kind of felt trapped in my business because, well, first of all, we were running 24/7, so it was nonstop all the time, right? And I would literally get calls in the middle of the night sometimes, and it wasn't rare that I would have to spend the night at work because, for insurance purposes, I had to have an employee there at all times if a customer was there. So sometimes I would do it. And so that was incredibly taxing, just like physically. But then, but yeah, so like we built the kitchen and went over on the costs for everything from day one. And then sales were slower to come in than we wanted. And then so I kind of basically started from day one with some money missing. And then for 13 months, I'm fighting to keep my head above water. And so there was like a point, I remember signing a contract for some equipment thing. It was like 250,000. Oh, for the ventilation system. And so a couple weeks later, the crane's there. They're like putting the whole thing on the building. And the bank calls me and they're like, oh, the loan we were supposed to give you to pay for that install that's happening right now, we're not going to give it to you. We change our mind or whatever bullshit. And so that day I'm like, okay, cool. I have this thing that's being installed. I don't have money to pay for it. So I need to find the money. And it's just like, it was like that every day, basically. And then my couple exploded because I was so focused on building my business that I completely, forgoed, my relationship. And then that was like really hard, but also kind of just, I was so focused on my business that I didn't really kind of take time to grieve or anything. It was just like one thing after the other. And so when the business kind of went to a point where I had this meeting, and I remember I was sitting in this meeting with my landlord's lawyer about something else completely. I showed up in this meeting because I thought we were going to talk about something I asked her to help me with. And she's like, okay, like you need to find the money for rent. And I talked to my landlord and I was like, can you just put it in writing? Like, I'm going to have the money in 5 days. And he said, I can't do it. And I kind of just knew then that that's like the only thing I could do now. Like I didn't have any other options because I knew him not wanting to put in writing meant that something was going to happen. And the lawyer in the meeting, she was like, did you consider going bankrupt? And that was like the first time someone kind of like told it to me like in my face. And I just remember starting crying and I was like, I knew that's what I had to do. So at that point, things went really quickly. That was like the Friday. And I called my friend who had gone bankrupt a couple months before. I was like, walk me through everything. The next morning, I had a meeting with his trustee. And I learned that I had to go personally also do a personal bankruptcy as well, because I had signed personal guarantees on some loans that I could not pay back. So yeah, Saturday morning, I'm in the trustee's office. On Monday, I announced my staff. And I think that Wednesday, we announced everybody, like publicly. And when that happened, it was like, really public on, big business newspapers or whatever. And at the time, that was like I was like kind of really ashamed of it. But then it came out and everyone was like kind of sending me messages of, oh, you had a good run, like it's really impressive what you did, this and this and that. And that was kind of like surprising, but also kind of nice just because I didn't have to rip the Band-Aid over and over again. Like the whole world knew I went bankrupt. So I did not have to announce to anybody that had happened, and kind of just twist the knife over and over. And that's only a thing I realized, later on. At the time, I was like, that's it, I'm over. But it's really not, that bad. And now, which is kind of fun because I talked about it so much. So like anybody who's going through a hard time, they're like, tell me what it is to go bankrupt. And I'm kind of like the go-to in Montreal for bankruptcy now, which is like funny, but also, I don't know, it feels like I had to talk about it, because people don't, and so many businesses have a hard time. Um, I felt like I had to kind of put my story out there for people to hear, to kind of give my side of the story, because it was like in the newspapers, but I felt like it was important to say like, yeah, I fucked up, like I had no idea what I was doing most of the time. And I feel like I still don't, like that was like 8 years ago, and I'm still building things, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't know, I get the same stress I used to get at the time. Like the reactions are different, but I don't know, building businesses is incredibly hard, and I think people need to acknowledge that more.
And after that experience, did you know that you wanted to stay in the startup space, or were you kind of thinking this startup thing is pretty hard, let me do something else?
Oh no, I knew 100% I was going to stay. There was no doubt in my mind. I At the time, I wanted nothing more than to get a job. Like I desperately wanted a job just because I had no money. And I kind of wanted people to forget me a little bit. Um, but it was pretty quick that I kind of just got back on the horse, and I was like doing stuff in my living room, but I wasn't telling anybody about it. That took me a couple years. Like I basically kind of stopped the whole networking thing, and I just lived under a cave for a couple years. But I started flipping stuff online, you know, a couple months later. I
And
kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole of like flipping, and yeah.
and so what was maybe the one or two main lessons that you took away from that food room experience where you were done with it, and then knowing that you wanted to continue in startups, what were some of the things that you're like, I'm not gonna do that again, or now that I've had this experience, I'm gonna do this differently?
Yeah. I think sleeping definitely top there. Um, I mean, I'm not just like sleeping, but I think taking care of myself, like beyond just like sleep, but like understanding your limits. Um, like because time is not elastic. And so Food Room happened at the time where like, Gary Vee was very, very loud about, hustling and whatever. So that was like the era. And that was kind of like the general consensus of what startups are supposed to be like. And yeah, learning to have balance in my life. I wasn't literally unable to not work 7 days a week because the FOMO was so intense that I would just get like crippling anxiety. And when your brain is all foggy and you're not rested, like you can't make good decisions. Um, so that was like, I guess the biggest thing. But then it's just like literally like operationally, like managing cash flow, what is a good expense and what isn't is a really, I think, you know, knowing what to spend your money on. And then sales are always going to be much longer than you think. Like, if you're going to do a forecast, uh, cut your sales in two, and then, double the amount of money you think you're going to need, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. I talked to this guy the other day, and he was basically saying do a worst case scenario
Mhm.
with kind of like financial forecasting, and then divide everything good by 10 and multiply everything bad by 10. I was like, man,
Yeah.
that's really aggressive. Like that
Yeah.
would probably put me in the red by a lot if I actually went through
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that exercise legitimately. So definitely heard that. I think the 10 and 10 was the most kind of extreme example I've heard of it, but I think that's definitely a common thing that you hear from entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And then so let's talk about the entrepreneur in residence role a little bit.
Sure.
How did you find that? How did you realize that that might be a good fit for you?
I didn't. The guy found me because he had seen me on the TV show thing. Um, I actually was applying for jobs, and I was talking to this recruiter, and there was like this job for this company that was kind of mildly interesting. And I found something else, told the recruiter, hey, just, pull that thing. I'm not interested anymore. And then he gets back to me and he's like, oh, I told them you weren't interested, but they want to meet you anyway. And I'm just like, what? What do you mean they want to meet me anyway? You're like, I just but I was really just curious, so I kind of showed up to the interview anyway. And then I'm in the meeting with the head of HR, and she's like texting in my face, and I'm just like, what is going on? What is this madhouse? And like within 5 minutes, she stops the guy talking. She's like, the CEO is here. He wants to meet you. Do you have time? And I'm just like, well, I'm here, aren't I? So 5 minutes later, I'm in this office with the CEO. He's like, so what do you want to do for a living? I invested like in a bunch of startups. Do you want to work for me? And I was like, you know what? Okay, sure. That was pretty much it. Like I literally signed the offer before leaving his office. Um, and yeah, he was investing in like a bunch of businesses on the side for fun, I guess. And he's not like part of like an organized group of angels or whatever. He's literally just like a dude. And so yeah, I had an office in a corner somewhere. I was like on the payroll of the agency, and the only thing I ever did for that company was organizing the Christmas party. But like I did a bunch of things that were like, I worked for a company. I think we mentioned this before, like kind of like Drizzly, where it's like wine delivery things. So there was like a new law in Montreal, Quebec, that was passed allowing grocery stores to sell wine, which was never before. So the play was to do it online. I worked on a company, a coffee roaster. I worked on this tech thing that he was building. It was like an internal tool that they built for the agency that they decided to open source and kind of like build this own tech thing. So I worked for that for a couple of months, and then he bought a big cafe, like a co-working space in the old port, because it was across the street, and he liked cortados basically. So I ended up starting to work there in March 2020, and 2 weeks later, put the whole payroll, lay off everybody because COVID. And then I kind of rode the pandemic. And I mean, I don't know how much you know about what happened here, but we had curfews and everything. It was pretty hardcore. So I basically played open, close, will it be today based on whatever the announcements are today for 2 years. And I was kind of burning out. So, when I went on mat leave, I was kind of hoping I was going to have like, my life plans, not regardless of that job. I just figured by the time I'm pregnant, I would have another business and something I could, get involved in full time. And then I got pregnant and I had nothing lined up, and I kind of just started freaking out a bit. And then yeah, my friend just kind of reached out, and he was like, yo, I have this company, and we knew each other. We had worked together a lot. He's the one who made my videos for Food Room, like at the time. And he was looking for partners. So I kind of felt like, I have this opportunity to try something new. I'm on mat leave for a year, so I'll just try that. And if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to my job. And that's kind of, how I left. But the job was really cool. I think I just kind of, yeah, the pandemic really kind of just burnt me out, and I was ready for something new. I was ready to go out and say like, yo, I'm doing this now. And that was like the first time I was advertising myself as an entrepreneur again. And it took me a couple of years to get there, just like mentally. But I think it was the right call. I was ready for it.
So how is it different kind of jumping in on all these different with all these different companies versus running one company? How does that look different from a day to day? Do you feel like you learned more in one versus the other? Just kind of compare those two experiences.
Yeah. I think what I was doing for him at the time was kind of similar to what I'm doing now as a fractional CEO, because it's really different depending on, the founders and the team that's there. Because different people have different preferences and different way of working. And so in some companies, my role was bigger. In some companies, I'm working on like limited projects. So that was really like dependent on what their needs were at the time, and the timing of the investment that was made and stuff. Which is kind of like how I work now too, right? Like, ideally, I would work with startups most of the time because they're the ones I have the most fun working with. But they're also startups, so a lot of them don't have money, which means that my clients who are paying me are a lot of the time SMBs. So in my case, when I was working for him, that wasn't an concern, because I just went wherever he told me to go. So what was cool about it is I had a lot of freedom. Like I was basically, doing not like what I wanted, but I was pretty much building the company as my own for him. And so that was really cool because I had all the resources also from the agency. So if we needed new websites or an app or whatever, that was all taken care of in-house. And I basically would use whatever I wanted in the agency to build things and he was pretty much, he was pretty laid back about everything because for him it was more like pet projects and stuff. He wasn't very involved, like as a investor.
And then did your perspective on entrepreneurship or startups generally change at all, given that you had kind of experience with so many different startups during, a few months or a year, whatever it was?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, for sure. I think I am a lot more aggressive with, getting sales really early on now. Um, like I think I have a lot more of a bootstrapping mentality just because I think, I mean, the VC landscape changed drastically, but also I think building a business. So I don't like have beef with this kind of idea that, VC this, VC that, but I don't think that the only way to build a business is to try and just grow faster than all the others. Like a good business could look a certain number of different ways for different people. And so now for me, like as a parent and stuff, what I want from my business is very different than this idea that I had at the time of what a business should be. Um, and so now, like when I coach entrepreneurs also, like I work with some incubators, and I think people are like really focused on, oh, building the product and doing this and this. And I'm like, okay, sure. But talk to customers, like build relationship with customers the same way you should build relationship with VCs if you're planning on raising in 2 years. But you want to put the word out. You want to share what you're doing and not just build something for 2 years in your basement because you don't know if someone wants it. And just, I don't know, I feel like if you're going to get someone to pay for something really early on, that might also help you decide what you're going to be building next. And yeah, the first thing I do for any kind of business I get involved in that I coach or as its fractional CEO or whatever is to kind of forecast the next 2 years and just figuring out, can the founders pay themselves? What's what's the game plan? How are you getting money? Where are your sales coming from? How are you talking to customers? Kind of just figuring out the basics of what is it that you're trying to build and does it make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And you were touching on this a little bit before, but you went to a video production agency right after the entrepreneur in
Yeah.
residence role. Is that right? So how
Yeah.
did you decide to do that? Because that seems like that's a pretty big pivot from what you had done
Yeah.
previously.
Um, honestly, I think I can say that now. Like at the time, I was really excited just because it was different and I needed to do something different. Um, but it was also partially, like I said, good co-founder fit. I think my partner and I had really complementary skill sets, and we were able to talk to each other in a way that made it make sense. I don't think, I was super aligned with the type of business it is. And I know that now just based on, if I'm going to be involved in a business full time, that's mine. I want to build a business, not just build a job for myself. And the nature of like agencies is like, it's not like I'm not chasing an exit, but I would like to have the option to have one, and not just sell, customer base basically. Because like I feel like the model of agency is kind of more redundant where you're in that specific case, the scope of what I would be doing was pretty much the same all the time. I really liked it, but I didn't see myself doing that for 10 years. So there was also like kind of that kind of facilitated the whole, are we keeping this up or not? But yeah, I wanted to try different things and I'm really happy I did because it kind of validated a lot of things for me for what I want to do next.
And what were you doing? Was your co-founder doing the actual filming and you were doing more of the business side, or how did that split of work
He,
look?
yeah. he was a creative director, and I was producing. So basically I would take care of the whole logistics I was doing customer relationship, biz dev, everything admin wise. And he was really kind of the product. I was the business side.
Makes sense. And then now you're doing more fractional work and coaching, right?
Mhm.
So how did you get into that? How are you liking that? How's it different from some of the other things that you've done?
Yeah. So I got into that because since Food Room, I've been doing kind of consulting kind of ish gigs. But I never sold myself as like consultant or whatever. But people would reach out because I had done things and they heard from me. So I kind of just took those for a while. And the timing of us decided to stop the agency and me trying to figure out what was next. At the time, I had a gig already. So I kind of figured I'm going to keep doing that until I find something else. And I wasn't really set on what I was going to find or what I wanted to do. And that's the time where I started posting on LinkedIn a lot. That was like January 23. Because at the time, I've been wanting to do it. And I was badgering my partner for like 6 to 8 months before closing the video company to do it because I've been, seeing an influx of creators on LinkedIn. I felt like there was value in us, trying to position ourselves as, um, thought leaders or whatever. And so I figured I'm going to do that for myself because I like writing and I have time and I didn't really have a plan at the time. And then took me about, I don't know, I think I rebranded myself as like fractional CEO in the summer because it took me a bit to figure out how I was going to do this. I think as far as like the kind of work I'm doing, um, my aim like is to find another business. Like I'm just not attached to this idea that my next business should be an idea I had and I built from scratch. But I do want a business. Like I'm not looking to just get a job somewhere. And my yeah, I want to find something. And I figured if I do fractional work, then I can meet some people, bring value short term, also get paid, which, somewhat important in this case. Um, I told myself I was going to stop doing free work because I did this for like years. And it always ended up with me working under the expectation of eventually I was going to get money and nothing ever happens. So that was like a big thing for me. But yeah, I'm not comfortable with this model of we take 3 coffees and then we're partners, like I think a work relationship goes so far deeper than that. So working with someone for 6 months felt like a good way to kind of feel out the relationship. And then, eventually if there's a need for the business for me to get in on board full time, that would be something I would be open to. But that was kind of like the biggest, like my kind of bigger play, I guess. But I'm actively trying to meet a bunch of startups to kind of feel out if there's a fit for something, or people who are looking for co-founders. But I'm not like, trying to get that done. I want to find the right fit, not just a
Yeah,
company.
that makes sense. So what does the right fit look like? What are some of the criteria that a
Oh God.
company or a person has to meet in order for you to be interested?
I think so. The purely business point of view. Um, I'm looking for something that has some kind of like, not necessarily, I want to say like, I don't like the word innovation because it feels like it's too broad and doesn't mean much anymore. But I want the business to have some kind of potential to have an impact. And I want to build something that's not just, you know, creating a job for myself. I really like the model of like, like boring businesses have been popping up everywhere. And that's like something. So my dad is an electrician. And when I was a teenager, I would work with him. And I've kind of always been fantasizing about this idea that I would build his business and, like he would be the product and I would be I like this idea of like logistical things and making things go from one point to the other. And, but yeah, so like shipping and manufacturing businesses are something that I'm really interested in. Like I worked in a warehouse for 4 years emptying trucks, and that's like the most fun I've ever had. um, there's something really satisfying about like your phone exploding when you get sales. that I'm really into. But yeah, overall, I am not really attached to a specific industry. Like there are some industries that interest me less. Like, but it's not like enough that would be like, oh yeah, this interests me more than I think like the med tech industry is something that I feels really foreign to me, and I don't feel like I would be, comfortable just because selling to hospitals and doctors isn't something that sounds really fun for me. But I mean, if I met someone building something, I could change my mind on that. Um, but really, I'm just looking for like, I think someone like smart human beings, honestly, like people who have, you know, a good head and are able to. I feel like I might come off like, sometimes I'm a bit rough around the edges. I don't know. I'm very transparent, so if I think something, I'm probably going to tell you, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And I'm okay with that, but I want to have fun with someone working with them, like have this kind of, how do we chat about things and how do we fight? Because we're going to fight. And like this idea that people don't fight is for me completely ludicrous. Um, I don't know. I'm not like, I don't have like clear criterias, I'm not looking to get in a company and be like, oh, if I don't have this much equity, I'm not going to take the deal, maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 10. I don't know, like it's not like, I don't feel like it should be a checkbox. It's like something you feel kind of, is that too esoteric for you?
No, that's not. I can appreciate that. So these last few questions, we'll just do them kind of rapid fire. So in your opinion, what's the hardest part about being an entrepreneur?
Oh, not being able to turn it off.
And then what's the most rewarding part?
Uh, Fending for yourself is incredibly rewarding.
And what would you say you know now that you wish you knew when you were getting started in your career?
Um, I think taking care of your mental health as an entrepreneur and being extremely severe with where you put your time is a superpower.
And then what's one mistake that you've made that you feel like you learned a lot from?
Not caring about cash flow enough.
And since you've done a lot of different entrepreneurial ventures, what's one thing that gets easier with time with entrepreneurship?
Dealing with ups and downs.
And then what's one thing that doesn't get easier?
Dealing with the ups and downs.
Um, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs just starting on their journeys?
It's hard, but it's fun, and that's why we do it. If it was easy, no one would do it.
And then where can people find you? Is there anything just that you want to plug at the end of this podcast?
I guess LinkedIn is probably the best way. I have a Twitter account, but I don't use it really. Yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the go.
Cool. By the way, I like the tattoo on your right arm. That's one. I don't have any
Which one?
tattoos
That's Oh, I have arms. I have
on
both
the
arms. Yeah.
like the
This
bands
one.
on the
The
other
bends. Oh
on the other one.
yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have
Is that your right arm or is that your left arm?
that's my right arm, yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I was like trying to transpose or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. If I got tattoos, that's one that I would get, but I don't have
Yeah.
any. Yeah.
Those are interesting because it goes around. So when you get it done, your arm gets swollen but everywhere.
Yeah.
Like my arm was shaped like a pear like for 3 weeks. And it was very painful. But
That
I mean not nearly as painful as rib cage, but
yeah, I would not get one on my rib cage. That one is popular with soccer players, which is why I like it.
I didn't know. I never saw anybody who had it. And then I got it, and then I realized so many people had it. And I guess it's like, you don't notice these things still happens
And
to you. But
exactly, yeah. Yeah, I've seen it a good amount. I see a lot of European soccer players with them, but not a lot of people in the States or
mm,
Canada with them.
21 Pilots, the lead singer, Tyler or
Oh,
something, he
okay.
has exactly the same tattoo. And
Gotcha.
I noticed that like 2 weeks after, and I was like, oh no.
Well, you have enough where I feel like it's okay if you have one or two
Yeah,
that are the same as other
yeah,
people.
exactly.
Cool. Well, any questions you had for me about the podcast or just in general?
No, how are you doing? Like, how's the, business?
It's fine. I mean, it's frustrating sometimes because a lot of things can be out of your control. So I could work, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And if there's a bottleneck that's someone else, I can send them an email every day, but that's not going to get them to actually do anything. So
Hmm.
we're just kind of stuck on a lot of, not stuck, but a lot of things are in other people's courts and they're just not working at the pace that I would like. And I'm used to like working at a very intense pace. So maybe I have unrealistic expectations,
Yeah.
but there's a few things that are just, we're like on the precipice of getting to some exciting things. And I feel like if certain people would just prioritize us a little bit more or work a little bit harder, then we could kind of get to these things a lot quicker. But, I'm not their parent or anything like that. So I can't punish them if they don't do what
Yeah.
they say or,
Is
work hard
that,
enough.
yeah. Is that something your negotiation skills can fix, or is just like there's nothing you can do about it?
It feels like not, it feels more like moving forward, changing the structure of the relationship a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, where it's like, okay, if we sign a contract with you, like setting out very clear deadlines in the contract, whereas now we don't necessarily have those. So if we just, artificially put deadlines on someone and then say we're not going to pay you unless you hit those deadlines, that kind of ruins the relationship. And then also
Yeah.
legally, I don't know if you can, I don't think you can even do that. So I think the learning is really like before you begin the relationship, really laying out clearly what the expectations are and what happens if the expectations are not met.
Yeah. Managing relationships like this is complicated because there's money involved, but also, it depends on entirely on the human being you're working with. And I think something I've learned is that deadlines are always kind of a suggestion. Like there's no deadline that's an actual deadline. Like even when the government, when your taxes, like it's which is something you can use to your advantage, I guess, to some extent. But it's frustrating when you're on the other side of the thing not happening at the
Yeah,
end of it.
and where the industry I come from consulting. So like it's very the client is always right. And it's kind of like the client might set a deadline of 2 weeks and then I'll be working towards that. And then the partner will tell me, oh, you actually have to do this in 1 week. And at that point, I have just like one day left to do it. So then I'm up all night. So that's kind of what I'm used to, like
Yeah.
really strict deadlines. And sometimes deadlines even get moved up. But you're right, in terms of just like generally, most people view deadlines as suggestions and they don't really seem to feel guilty if they don't hit them.
Well, I mean, I guess that's like one of the things that if you can, when you're looking for partners or like factories or manufacturers or whatever, it's one of the many things that you vet, and having, intros can go a long way in like building the relationship with those people, right? I think
Yeah,
there's also a culture clash. In your case, that's probably something you're going to want to look at, where you end up making your stuff.
yeah, for sure, for sure. But yeah, it's just, one of the many challenges of starting a business.
Yeah. I mean, it's still exciting. Like I'm excited to see what you come up with.
Yeah, I'm
Like it
excited
feels like,
too. We're close, like we're very close to being able to show some cool stuff, but it's just like we can't show it until we have it. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah. Well, thanks for
But I
coming
think you're
on. It
doing a good
was,
job of building the hype too.
I mean, I hope so. We'll see. Definitely come a long way since because I started with LinkedIn basically the same time you did.
Mm.
Um, January, like December,
Hmm.
2022, January 2023. Can't remember exactly when, but sometime in that time frame. And I took a long time off at a certain point in time, like 3 or 4 months, maybe even 5 months off. And I
Hmm.
basically like gave up on it. And then I came back and it was a lot easier once I came back because I was doing it because I wanted to, not because I felt like
Yeah,
I had to.
yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I hope you figure it out and it works out.
Yeah, I think it's just we just got to be patient. You can't rush some of these things, and no one is going to care as much about your business or getting
Oh
things
yeah.
done as quickly as you do. So I think that's just another thing I got to get used to.